Let me thank you first for the opportunity given to me to share my observations as well as my views. Not as an ASEAN official, because I have already completed my tenure with the ASEAN, including as the Executive Director of AHA Center, but more as a citizen of ASEAN, as well as a critical lover of ASEAN and a loving critic. My statements and my report and what I'm going to share with you is my view, my personal view, and I should mention it doesn't reflect the view of the organization that I'm currently affiliated, that is the ISIS Institute for Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore, as well as the organization that I work for, both the ASEAN Secretariat and AHA Center, collectively almost 3 decades. So it's a personal statement. I have written and also advocated quite extensively on the Myanmar issues following my completion of the contract with ASEAN, and basically these are around the need for ASEAN to take an inconvenient approach in dealing with the Myanmar crisis. So unlike the other speakers that have spoken before me, I'd like to focus more on the ASEAN's role, as well as what the individual governments in ASEAN can do. I think it's also in relation to some of the questions from members of the parliament from the ASEAN countries. But of course, my observation is also based on my own experience working within the ASEAN system, my own experience in developing some instruments within ASEAN that later on were used and utilized to deal with the Myanmar crisis, and also my own recent observations talking to the people of ASEAN and those who have been involved with humanitarian assistance on the ground. I would like to share, before I share with you some of my recommendations, I would like to share with you some of the findings that I have. You can actually find them in the articles that I have written before, but I plan to write one briefer for you later on. And if certain details cannot be reflected quite well during my intervention today, then you will find the details in the briefing paper that I will share with you after this. So one critical point that I'd like to share with you is that while the ASEAN Charter provides for the ASEAN leaders at the summit, which is the highest level in ASEAN, the supreme decision-making body in ASEAN, to take extraordinary measures in emergencies, there is actually no regional crisis mechanism that would guide ASEAN as a regional bloc to collectively address a politically or a conflict-induced crisis when the de facto authority is the source of violence and the one that commits gross violation of human rights. There is no crisis mechanism in ASEAN. We know that the ASEAN also, and that also my point, hasn't been able to address internal crisis within the borders of ASEAN. And all of these flaws, I would say, are quite exposed in the midst of this crisis in Myanmar. So that's one point that I'd like to share with you. And second, however, unfortunately, when it comes to humanitarian assistance or humanitarian mechanism, ASEAN has relied on a disaster management mechanism instead that was actually developed with Indian Ocean tsunami in mind. And I'm talking about the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, which is really like the Bible in ASEAN when it comes to natural disasters like earthquake, tsunami, floods, volcanic eruptions. And this Bible was created. It was actually it's a very creative regional agreement, and I think we all in ASEAN should be very proud of it. But it was created with Indian Ocean tsunami in mind. As you know, in 2004, big waves affected countries of Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, as well as Myanmar and some of the neighboring countries. So this disaster management agreement was created with this Indian Ocean tsunami in mind. And then disaster management agreement, the references that we use, I was part of the drafting group when we developed the agreement, and I had the opportunity to be part of the negotiation committee. The references that we used were the International Disaster Response Law and the relevant UN General Assembly resolution. Not only that, the agreement was created with an understanding that the government of the country affected by the disaster is able and willing to provide humanitarian assistance to their disaster-affected people. Now, that is the assumption, or that is the context that we are working on when it comes to that Bible on disaster management mechanism. And the AHA Center, that is the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, was created with that understanding that the country affected by the disaster is able and willing to provide assistance. It is the responsibility of the country affected by the disaster to respond first to the population, and other ASEAN countries, including AHA Center, will provide assistance, will provide regional assistance to the country affected by the disaster. But the situation is different in the case of the current political crisis in Myanmar. Why? Because, as I mentioned, the so-called de facto authority is not able and is not willing to provide assistance to the people. So that one assumption is already not applicable to be used for this case. Second, because AHA Center was born out of this disaster management agreement, or the Bible I've mentioned, so it is also not relevant for the situation. But AHA Center has been mentioned and actually is put as one of the conduit and the channel to facilitate humanitarian assistance for this political crisis. Now, AHA Center relies on the disaster management mechanism. It cannot just act on its own. It relies on the mechanism agreed by the 10 ASEAN countries. It can only move based on the standard operating procedure developed by the 10 ASEAN countries and agreed by the 10 ASEAN countries. And the agreement and the SOP said that when there is a disaster, it is the government of the affected country that will exercise direction and control of assistance to the people. You try to apply that to the conflict, that would mean basically giving up that power to the one that exercise that is the source of violence. And that means exposing the ASEAN mechanism, meaning the disaster management mechanism and AHA Center, to be manipulated and utilized by the one that is actually taking that is committing a crime against humanity. So I think it is very important that ASEAN governments realize that and consider the implications of over-reliance on a disaster management mechanism, including a center that actually are designed for other purposes. So the issue is not not on the disaster management mechanism and not on the AHA Center. It's about applying, it's about expecting a rambutan tree to produce durian fruit. And that rambutan tree is the disaster management mechanism and the AHA Center. Unfortunately, however, ASEAN doesn't have any other mechanism that can actually deliver humanitarian assistance to the people affected by the crisis. Therefore, then they turned to the existing mechanism that actually can be utilized. But that is not suitable for this purpose. So that's the second point. Do not expect rambutan tree to produce durian fruit because you will never get the durian fruit. Now, number 3, humanitarian assistance, however, not only in ASEAN, but also in other parts of the world, has been used as a convenient tool, as the political veranda, as a diplomatic sweetener, as the breathing space, while the other tracks are being worked on. And I think we should not allow that to happen anymore. There is a gap, not only in ASEAN, but also within the international community, between the political track and the humanitarian track. The humanitarian track has the so-called humanitarian principles, but I think if the humanitarian track falls under the political track, then what actually that humanitarian track will do is following the order of the political track. So there needs to be operational independence given to the actors that will deliver assistance to the people. And because of that reason, I put the next argument or the next point, that is to channel assistance to the actors and networks that the people affected by the crisis trust. And my colleagues that have spoken before me have mentioned the way to go is border-based assistance. I mentioned about humanitarian resistance. And then I change it into cross-border assistance. And now I name it as border-based assistance. Why? Because there is a connotation. And when it comes to border-based assistance, it's only assisting people in the border areas. No. As mentioned by the speakers before me, when we talk about border-based assistance, it's not only the geography. It's about not cooperating with the SEC, not cooperating with the military junta, using the channel that the people, basically the civil society have used for decades. And we have many actors that have been operating for decades and have the experience. I have spoken to them, and what I have gathered is that I think we all have underestimated and undermined the capacity of these local actors to deliver assistance. So it is not for ASEAN to deliver assistance operationally, no. In fact, it is not for the UN and other international community to do so. What is important right now is to make our assistance as locally as possible. And this has been actually, the messages that we have been trying, to advocate, not only this part of the region, but also in other parts of the region, making humanitarian action as locally as possible. And there have been actors that have been doing that. Now, unfortunately, I've been told, and many have been told, that Adelina, it is not technically feasible and politically viable to do border-based assistance because they don't have the absorption capacity, because they don't have the experience, because they are not registered. Because if we are supporting them, it means we are supporting the resistance movement. But it's about also taking side. Are you going to actually give more milk to the one that is committing crime against humanity? Or rather, doing it through the channel that the people already trust? Because when it comes to humanitarian action, trust is important. Otherwise, the assistance will be rejected. So I think it is important that we create this more arguments that border-based is just not just talking about the geography. Border-based assistance can, in fact, go through further to the to the central of Myanmar through cash, like what the other speakers have mentioned. There are some creative ways of doing that, and we can explore it further together with the local humanitarian actors on the ground that have been doing it for years, not only years but decades. What they need is actually more money. So rather than asking the questions and challenging that it is not feasible to do that, then what about actually allowing or providing the conducive environment and providing the input for that output to actually happen? That is my answer to the people that have actually been questioning about border-based assistance.